I will say that my internet does go in and out sometimes, so please let me know if you just stop hearing me, or something's going on there, so I can make sure that I'm getting you all the information um, that I can. And I'm going to try and cover a lot of topics today, but I will be doing some deep dives on some tools that are available to you. They are free. It's all public information that you can access to be able to, figure out some of more of the specifics and just being able to navigate around land access in particular, and just getting to know, different zoning and site histories, that sort of thing. Um, so I'm going to be shared my screen on a presentation and then kind of flipping out to a couple of websites so you can see where you can find some of this information and how to navigate those sites as well. We can go ahead and get into it. Just give me a second.
And Viviana, really quickly, how did you get into this field?
Um, well, I think it's a couple of different avenues. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, obviously, seeing what our food reality is, and grew up in an environmental justice community, just like really recognizing the impact of those kind of like compounded issues. Personally, like for me, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder at a pretty young age, and it's also food related. So that just caused me to get really focused on understanding what our food system is, figuring out why our food system is the way it is, why I have, really strong reactions to particular types of food, and just the history of how they got to be cultivated in that particular way. I come at it from a couple of different angles, but it's definitely a very personal journey for me, and also just trying to figure out ways to resource my community and make sure that we can have tools to ensure our own food sovereignty, and then also be able to share that with other people. So yeah, there's a lot of ways, that a lot of things that led me to this path, but I'm grateful to be here, and grateful to be able to share some of this knowledge with you all as you continue on your journey in agriculture. And I would love to hear more about all y'all's journey this year, but I figure we're kind of on a timeline here today. So hopefully we could do that at some point in the future. And again, encourage you to get involved with the work that Advocates for Urban Agriculture does. We're here to support you all. We want to see a thriving food ecosystem in Chicagoland, and we provide a number of different types of workshops, a number of different ways to get involved, both on an advocacy level, to make sure that we have sort of a welcoming environment for agriculture in this area, and all like water access, land access, all these pieces, and then also just a community of practices as well. I know y'all have this great space to interact with each other and share in your journey through the years. But there are a lot of people doing this work, and there's a really amazing group of people in Chicago involved in ag, as I'm sure you've seen already. So Advocates for Urban Agriculture is just one way to plug into that. Also, we have a listserv where you can hear both about jobs and then resources that are available. People do a lot of just resource sharing on that platform as well. So I encourage you to check out our website at auachicago.org. But now that I put that plug in there, I'll go ahead and get started with this presentation. So just give me a second. All right. Can you all see this presentation screen? Yes? Awesome. Okay. So the good practices for running a farm business in Chicago, it feels like almost a bold statement, but it is backed up by a larger project called the Good Practices for Growing in Chicago, which is a program that began in 2018 with AUA, and it was a collective of 14 active urban agriculture practitioners, so people running their own farm businesses and nonprofits in the city of Chicago and in surrounding areas, as well as 2 soil scientists and 2 wholesale purchasers. So we came together over about 8 months to talk about, as a community of practice, what are these sort of standards that we can be meeting to make sure that we're growing food in a safe way, one that's respectful to the neighborhood that we're in, and one that will encourage a sustainable business model. Excuse me. This is kind of morphed over time. We have a workshop series that's associated with it. This is one piece of that. We'll also soon be launching an online tool that will allow you to go through the whole list of everything that's in the good practices for growing in Chicago, and be able to kind of self-assess where you're at, and ways that you can, maybe improve your business or make sure that you have, you can ensure your longevity, not only as a business, but also in your sustainability across the board, right? Both in practices and your business. And that'll be available hopefully within the next month. So I encourage you to check back in, and I'll make sure Paul gets that link as well so that you can share that out. But today, we are going to be focusing on particularly the business and market development section, and just some subcategories of that, of land access. So really getting into zoning, getting a good understanding of what zoning means for us as urban agriculture practitioners, and then really digging into site histories and getting a better idea of how to find out as much information about a piece of land before you start farming it, getting a better idea of what was there before, is there any hazards or contamination that you should be aware of, ways to mitigate that risk, and all things land, particularly in the city of Chicago. But then we'll also show you some tools that will be helpful outside of Chicago as well. So zoning is it's a very overly complicated topic, and thing that we have to figure out how to navigate. Oftentimes it's going to require, having some kind of legal background to really be able to navigate the city systems. But hopefully with this, you'll get a little bit of an idea of what are some tools that are available to you for free, to figure out, where you stand, what, if there's a particular piece of land that you're looking at that you're interested in, just understanding a little bit more about what's going on with it, and what are the parameters that you have to work with it. So it is important for a number of different reasons. One of the main ones being that you need to understand what the zoning is on whatever site that you're working on to be able to obtain a business license. It's also going to be really important when figuring out any kind of building permits that you might need. I've seen this come up for sites that want to build out a new hoop house, and they need to know how tall can it be, or this comes up a lot for folks when depending on your zoning, like most sites that urban agriculture is currently taking place, like you can't technically bring power onto the site because of the zoning there. So it just kind of it'll help you figure out where you have to place things, particularly thinking about refrigeration, or if you need anything else that requires a power source, to figure out what's allowable on site and what's not going to be allowed, and just kind of figuring out, where to place things and how you're going to build out your business and the infrastructure that you might need on site. It's also going to be relevant when if there's ever a complaint on your site. Ideally, this won't happen, but it does happen. One predator that we certainly encourage in our good practices program is just building great relationships with your neighbors, really getting to know the neighborhood that you're working in, building a relationship with your alder's office, absolutely the people in your immediate vicinity, building a relationship with them first, because they are the people who are in the closest proximity, ideally would be benefiting from the produce that you have, that you're growing. But if you have good relationships with your neighbor, it's much less likely that you're going to get a complaint, that you will typically go to the alder's office unless they talk with you first. And then the alder's office is like, that's something that might be something where they're going to be looking at your zoning. If you're out of compliance, you could end up with some problems there. So some things that might come up when you're out of compliance, for buildings, if you're doing an indoor operation, rooftop operation, there could be a stop work order for that particular building if you're out of compliance in your zoning. The city might ask you to cease activity of your business altogether, which we definitely want to avoid. And that might be just, business compliance, or if there's complaints, if that sort of thing going on, if there's like some really egregious thing that's happened on your site that needs to be addressed. It might, you might end up having to have conversations and negotiations with the city. And in what I've seen in working with folks in the city of Chicago, that's often going to lead to lots of legal documents, and that typically is going to mean that, you know, you're probably going to want some support of a lawyer to kind of navigate that, and that also means that you're incurring expenses along the way too. So just, you know, a way to keep costs down is to make sure you know your zoning and what you're getting yourself into, and also what to expect potentially in the future. Zoning is also becomes relevant with other licenses that you might be seeking to get, or permits as well. So it might not just be the business license. It might mean that you get either you won't get approved, or you'll get removed from getting a city department license, like a hydrant access permit. So that's just something to keep in mind, and to, you know, there's all these different pieces that have to come together. Excuse me. Have to come together for you to be able to run your business and have your water access, have your infrastructure, have, you know, whatever power you might need on site, wash pack stations. All that is going to be relevant if a building inspector comes around and see different things on site. They're going to be wanting to know what you're on it. So zoning is for urban farms is nuanced and interesting. And there's been some helpful articles that have come out over the years. There's also a really helpful manual that came through from the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights that's all about zoning and community input in zoning. So I recommend checking that resource out. You can find that at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights website. And they helped us figure out some of these little nuances as well. These charts you see right here are also from an article that was in the Southside Weekly a couple years ago. So I'll just jump into it right here. So urban farms are technically allowed in all commercial areas. One thing that I will say about commercial areas is, you know, particularly if you're looking to purchase the land, is that the taxes are something to consider there. They tend to be higher, and it's something that, you know, might be an unforeseen cost if you're not anticipating that. It's, you know, it's great because they are allowed in all, and that's the one that has the least sort of parameters that you have to navigate, but it's those financial aspects you also need to be considering. Urban farms are also allowed in planned manufacturing districts, or PMDs. Indoor and rooftop operations are allowed in all PMDs. Outdoor operations are only allowed in PMD 9, 10, and 13. And that's just, you know, given what the particular site history has probably been before, and just you know, contamination concerns that might be there, particularly because, you know, thinking about manufacturing, you know, thinking industry, there's likely it's more likely that there was some kind of industrial presence, possibly chemical presence, whether it's like if there was a parking lot there, you want to be thinking about that petroleum. If there was, like, you know, paint waste processing facility, that might be something that you want to be thinking about. Just like all these considerations to just make sure that you have a safe environment to work in for yourself as well. All manufacturing districts are also a zone in which urban farms are allowed. Outdoor operations aren't allowed in M1, but they are allowed in M2 and M3. M1 is just for heavy industrial activity, whereas M2 and M3 are kind of like more light manufacturing. And districts, you know, you definitely want to be thinking about, if you do identify a site that seems like a good, viable site for your farm business. I cannot stress enough testing your soil. We'll get into a little bit about site history, about what to look for, but testing your soil is just a good way to know what to expect on a site. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on. And there are, you know, like manufacturing districts, there is a lot of land that is still available in Chicago to do this. It's just a matter of whether you're renting it, whether you choose to try and purchase that land, just a lot of different things to consider. The next zone that is, you know, where urban farms are allowed are in a limited fashion is business districts. Indoor operations are only permitted in B3. And you can do rooftop operations with a special use permit in a B3 district. Outdoor operations are typically not permitted in any business district. So just something to keep in mind. So you're kind of limited to either the indoor or the rooftop, specifically only in B3. And then one zone that I think is pretty interesting is the downtown districts. Indoor and outdoor operations are only allowed in DS districts, and that typically means rail yards, in warehouses, and then businesses that are kind of in the periphery of downtown. However, rooftop operations are permitted in all different types of downtown districts. I attribute that probably that, which this is an assumption, but I'm guessing that it has something to do with Richard M. Daley and that administration. I kind of see that as part of that legacy. At that time, that's when we got the rooftop garden on top of City Hall. So that was kind of like that era of things, and I attribute that largely to the move towards LEED certification. The impact of rooftop gardens doing that sort of like heat island effect mitigation, storm water absorption, that sort of thing. So that's like an interesting aspect of Chicago, where that is one of the places where rooftop gardens are good to go no matter what, or given all the other parameters that you would need to follow for a rooftop garden, making sure that it can handle the weight, that all the infrastructure is there to be able to support soil on a roof, right?
Excuse me, Viv. We have two good questions.
Okay.
So the first question is, as business models change over time and zoning in your area changes over time, what are your options and protections?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. But some of the ways that you can get just kind of like get an idea of what that's going to mean for you with the city is get a zoning opinion letter. So even before you get on the site, you can kind of get from the Department of Planning and Development what a zoning administrator can kind of give you their opinion letter. Of course, they're gonna charge you for it, but to kind of be able to see if it isn't already, is there any kind of planned developments there? What sort of developments are those going to be? Just kind of getting an idea of like if there's something that's already in the works that you need to be worrying about your tenure on that particular piece of land. And then of course, I can't stress enough entering into a strong lease, getting the proper legal advice to be able to figure out how to navigate to make sure that you have those protections ahead of time before you even do anything on site. So whether you're entering into a lease, whether you're purchasing it, definitely getting that sort of legal assistance and seeking that out, whether it's through something like Farm Commons or there's a new farm legal aid network that has popped up as well that I'm really happy to see happening, because that was something that was definitely a big gap in the industry before. So there are more resources coming out around that, but definitely seeking the assistance of a lawyer to really understand what you're entering into, what kind of protections that you can ensure before before the ink is dry and you sign anything, and making sure that you just have those protections for your business as well. Was there another question, or does that answer it, or was there another question as well?
I think you answered it, and you are going to talk about any kind of like changes in zoning or like how you could go through that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
We will get to it, I promise. But before we do, one couple things that I do want to cover is that where it's not permitted. And there are exceptions to both of these. So technically, urban farms are not allowed in residential areas. So we see a lot of people getting really excited about the $1 lot program, or starting up like right next to somebody in a neighborhood. And technically, it's not permitted, although we see this already. And zoning, for certain, is one of those things where largely in the city of Chicago, urban farms that do exist are kind of in this kind of gray zone legally with the city. And there's ways to navigate that and figure it out and be able to protect yourself. But technically, urban farms are not allowed in residential areas. And I think that's just a lot comes from just being concerned about like what's happening right next door to a home, obviously livestock and like compost and like smells and all these like sort of nuisances that might exist in a residential area or connect people. So that's why it's technically restricted. Urban farms are technically not allowed in any parks. However, we see that there are farms and parks, and that is able to happen through what's called a land use agreement with the Chicago Park District. In that case, you really, what I've been told is that you really just want to, if you're interested in farming on public land, you need to be keeping in mind any utilities that might be underneath that and making sure that it is away from any or doesn't interfere with any other park activities. So, for example, Windy City Harvest has a farm in park in Washington Park. The youth farm is over there, right? And, I assume that they were able to do that through a land use agreement with the park district. So there are some possibilities there. Obviously, the park district is one of the, if not the largest landholder in the city of Chicago. So technically they're not permitted, but in both of these, there are some other ways to still engage in that way in these spaces, but just need to follow different paths for that. In residential areas, yeah, I mean, that's something that AUA has been working on to figure out how to navigate and see if there's possibilities of opening that up, because obviously, and we're definitely seeing this right now, ensuring our own food security in our neighborhoods is really important, and being in close proximity to the people that we want to be selling to, especially in places dealing with food apartheid, that there are still some possibilities there, even though technically it's not allowed. But again, that piece, building a good relationship with your alder, is going to be key no matter what. So I want to, I'm talking a lot about zoning, but you're like, all right, how do I find out? How do I know where this is at? And there is plenty of places that you can look. I'm just going to go ahead and go to the city website so you can see exactly, on the map, if there's a city there, if there's a particular parcel of land that you're looking at, be able to find out as much information about it as possible for what's publicly available on the web. So if you'll give me a second, I will get that. So I'm going to go to just straight to the city's website.
We're still on your presentation, Viv.
Perfect. That means I did it right. How about now?
We're on the website.
Okay, great. So chicago.gov, whole bunch of helpful information, especially for starting your business. So in order to find where we need to go, zoning is something that's housed under the Department of Planning and Development. So we go to government, we go to departments, and we go over to planning and development. And we get site. And you would think that you'd go to business owners to be able to find all that helpful information for starting a business, but that's not the case, nor is it for property owners. Instead, we go to the section that's for developers, because technically you'd be developing the site in a particular way, right? And you'll find the zoning code there, but we're going to focus today on the zoning map. Do you see a map in front of you? Awesome. Okay, so there's a ton of useful information here. Sometimes it's linked to even more. You can kind of like really go down a rabbit hole here to find information in different documents associated with particular sites. For example, if there's been any zoning changes, that usually has to go through the city council. So you'll see like the journal of the city council proceedings and all the sort of information that's associated with that. We'll just use it as an example. I'm going to go ahead and use Legend South, since it's likely a site that y'all are familiar with. So I'm going to type in that address and hit search. It brings us over there. And then I'm also just going to click aerial so we can see actually, what are at these sites. What is it that you can see from space? So we see here, all the beds that are there, see the hoop houses, see the homes, and, just the sites surrounding it. And on that, we see that it is a PD 1135. So what does that mean? So we click on that, and you'll get this toolbar that pops up on the side, and we see that PD means planned development, and it has a number associated with it. On this little bar, I just want to highlight a couple of really helpful pieces of information that's available. Um, we'll see that it's in the planning region southeast. So if you do have to do any planning or any zoning changes, wanting to get an understanding of what that is and who it is that you'll be dealing with, because there's different people that deal with different regions, right? And that'll also be relevant in the zoning map index to be able to refer specifically to that site. One of the most important pieces of information that you can get, whether it's inside of Chicago or outside of Chicago, is the PIN number, or the property identification number. That's associated with a particular parcel of land. That is just going to open up a bunch of possibilities, both for finding information on public records on a particular parcel of land, and then also, if you're, writing any legal documents, if you're talking about leases, if you need to refer to it for pretty much anything, if you're talking with your alder's office, like, this is a number that's going to be relevant over and over and over again. So just getting familiar with your property identification number. We see that this is also with the 47th and State TIF district. So in an ideal world, TIF dollars would be available for developments such as this that are serving the community. So that's something to just keep in mind for the future. It's also something that you can bring to the attention of your alder's office to see, is there sort of any funding that's available there that you can leverage for building your business and being able to make food available and ensure food security, that sort of thing. Other super helpful piece of information, particularly talking with your alder's office, is the ward. So getting to know what ward you're in is going to make a world of a difference in just being able to understand the context that you're working in. Also, the community area is going to be relevant. So in Chicago, if you don't already know, there's 50 different wards and there's 77 different community areas. In this case, Legends is located in Grand Boulevard. And so typically the different areas will often have a quality of life plan. They'll have different organizations that serve those areas, different political or planning or chamber of commerce, that sort of thing, that are working in these particular areas in these different neighborhoods. And so getting familiar with the plans that already exist and the sort of like community consultation process that has already taken place and that resulted in those reports is going to be helpful, just so you can understand the context that you're working with and be able to build those sort of key relationships to, one, make sure that people are happy that you're there, that they want you there, that they're going to welcome your business there, but also getting a better understanding of what your market is, where are some places that your produce can go to, just different possibilities for really being able to situate your business within the larger context of a neighborhood or whatever community area that you might be in. This is going to be relevant both in Chicago and outside Chicago. There's similar websites for the county as well that you can kind of use, and then take these keywords to be able to search and kind of dig in further and find out more information. So we've got that PIN number. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that because we will need that tool later on. What's also really interesting and helpful, and this isn't going to be the case for every single site, but if you can get this information, this sort of stuff is available for you. So if you see under zoning district and plan development, we see a couple of things there. We see that there's a zoning ordinance number, meaning that there was some zoning changes that occurred there. We see the zoning ordinance date, so you can know when that happened. It'll also give you an idea of also the political context in which that was happening. Business in Chicago is inherently political, so it's good to have an idea, again, of the context that you're working in. So here we can actually, this is hyperlinked, so we can actually click on that and be able to find out a little bit more information. What that did was it auto downloaded a PDF, which I can show you right now. If you just give me a second. And a lot of times with that, it's not going to pop up immediately. It might go to that sort of like download section on your web browser. So just make sure you keep an eye on that. So I'm going to go open that up. And this is the document that I was able to find just through the zoning map. And we see that this was from March of 2013, so that probably means that that's when the zoning change occurred. Give you, yeah, see, we see a reclassification of areas shown on this map. We see the different parameters of that particular piece of land and how it was defined before. And that there was a change in the municipal code, or sorry, not the change in the municipal code, but this, because of the municipal code, this is the way that a zoning change and ordinance has to be enacted. And again, we see here that the Journal of City Council in Chicago, so for any issue, you can find, it's publicly available information for any of the city council meetings. You can go into the journal and be able to get some of the information of whatever different things that were discussed in city council. Zoning is definitely going to be one of those things that comes up pretty often. And this, you can find that generally through the website, through the City of Chicago website. So here we're able to see a little bit about what was discussed, who was involved. We see the Department of Housing and Economic Development is involved there. We see some different landscape and architects that were involved there and their firms. We see, approval for the urban farm, that was in there. Just lots of interesting information. And for me, the juicy parts are usually in the exhibits, which is typically where you'll find the maps to get a better idea of what's going on at that site.
You're bringing up a lot of past trauma here, Viviana.
I was a little concerned that it might happen. Sorry, Eliza. I know all of this required a whole lot of work.
This is it's complete transparency here, everyone. This is a ton of work and many, many years to put some context on it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Like the things like zoning changes, if that's something that you want to do, it's going to take years. It's going to take lawyers. It's going to take a lot of patience. So, if that is something that you're looking into, just know that you got to plan for the long game on that. And fortunately, Windy City has been able to do that. But that there's a lot of different possibilities, but just know that there is a lot of careful thought that has to go into this, and a supportive community of practitioners in multiple, not just agriculture, but lots of different fields, both legal, talking about insurance, those different pieces. So here we see that same site that we were looking at on the zoning map. And we see that oh, cool, they're going to allow an urban farm here. Technically, that road that's down the middle, that's technically a public alley, which is interesting. You wouldn't necessarily just know that unless you're looking at, really digging into these sort of maps and stuff that's here. So, urban farm is something that's allowed here. We see, a specific letter that came through this department in the city of Chicago, the people who were involved there, dates to get a better understanding of what's happening. All the specific ways that they're describing things. The duration of things, right? How long does an agreement like this last? And then we see, the zoning administrator who dealt with this issue. And so they're probably going to have the best context to also understand what's been going on at that particular site. From what I know, we see that it's defined as a planned development zone. We see that this is also land that's future for sale. So you ever see that on a map, and if you're looking at a particular parcel of land, that's information you want to know, to be able to have a better understanding of what your land tenure is. And then plenty of information here, lots of things that are X'd out because sometimes it gets messy with the ways that the city records things. But again, just looking at the parameters, let me see if there's anything else that's helpful to highlight here. And you see this is also going back as far as 2009 too. So again, those years of planning that went into place here. Yeah, so this is just more information about the particular area, not the clearest map. We see that, because this is previously or might return to residentially zoned, that each of those different plots could end up being a different house in the future. So just things to think about and really understand. Different site plans, all of these maps are going to be helpful in not only planning the future of your business, but also your farm design and knowing what was there before.
Hey, Viviana, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So when you say plan development, like, can you elaborate on that a little bit? You know, like who's planning the development? What does that mean in terms of zoning?
Sure. So that typically will mean that a developer has entered into a conversation with the city, and either a real estate developer or possibly there's some conversation with the alder's office there, meaning that they have plans for a site and it hasn't happened yet. There are plans for it in the future. So when you see something described as PD dash whatever it might be, know that there's already some future plans for that particular site. So that could involve an urban farm, but they might have something totally different in mind. And what I've also seen happening a lot in the city of Chicago is that, oftentimes urban agriculture is considered somewhat of a placeholder for future developments. So that sort of like land tenure, being able to secure that access has proven difficult for, I would say, most people, if not all people, trying to do these things, trying to start an urban farm business in the city of Chicago. So it's just good to know if that is the case, if there's any other future plans for that. So plan development, meaning like something's coming down the pipeline. It might not be totally public knowledge yet. It technically is because you're able to find this through publicly available data, but it's not something that is like necessarily actively talked about at even your meetings or your kind of like ward meetings or anything that's happening there. So on just a citizen level, having access to information like this is really helpful to just know what might be happening in a neighborhood, or what are the possibilities for starting different projects in different areas. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. And while we're paused, is there any other questions in the chat that I should be addressing? You're on mute, Paul.
Can you go back and show us how you got to this document?
Sure. So from going to the city website, going to planning and development, going to for developers, and then to the zoning map. From the zoning map, I was able to get access to this by first clicking on the particular zoning. That made this toolbar pop up on the side. You can see the map right now, right? Okay. And then if you look at zoning district, we see that there is a hyperlinked number here. And so what I went ahead and did was I clicked on that, and then that led to a download on my web browser. And then I just opened that up and it kind of showed me this PDF. And so it's like with using a PDF reader, I was able to see that document. Cool.
So that's not something that all locations will have on the map. It's just something that.
Not necessarily, no. Like if you find something with that, great, because it's going to give you more information on the site. If not, getting that PIN number from that same sidebar is going to help you find potentially that information on other sites. Yeah. So it's not across the board, but that is one place that you can just like really easily be able to access information like that if that particular parcel of land is associated with a paper trail. And because this is a zoning map, it's going to be any zoning changes that occurred there. So specifically for zoning, like that's where you would find that. If any changes have occurred over time, it's going to show you who they talked to, the time that it occurred in, and give you a little bit more about the context that they were operating within. And while this is within the city site and you can dig into the zoning code, I found this website a lot easier to navigate in a lot more layman's terms for folks, which is secondcityzoning.org. So I'll click on that, and I assume you're still seeing my screen, so excuse me as I figure out how to navigate this.
We're still on the City of Chicago screen.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'll show you how I did that then. So going back to the presentation, which I'm happy to share with you so you can have access to all these real specific links. I went to secondcityzoning.org and I went ahead and clicked on that, and that opened up another web page for me. So Second City Zoning, click that. And that brought me to this website. And I found this super helpful because it just gives you a breakdown of what all the different zoning districts mean, what that means for you. So the different heights of things that you can have there. In residential, the sort of front yard setback, because that's something that is on a lot of different types of zoning, multi-unit, that sort of thing. And if we keep scrolling down, we see what that means for different business areas, commercial areas, what that means, the sort of like square footage of those particular areas. Downtown districts, we see that, the downtown service district. So, that means like if you wanted to do something with something that's zone DS, that means it has to be in a rail yard, a warehouse, small business in the periphery of downtown. And I'll just say that rail yards probably are not a good place to be having an urban farm generally. Something that I found just through my own work that I do in our community garden, we're right next to a rail line, and they will regularly spray with herbicide just to kind of keep this sort of like line of sight for the trains that are passing through. So that's sort of like, having these sort of bits and pieces of information that you can kind of be able to figure out what was there before is going to give you an idea of like what the chemical history of a particular site is too. So if it's been sprayed with herbicides for a decade, probably not the best place for an urban farm. Like if you're going directly in that rail yard, right? So just a helpful site to kind of help you navigate, understand what all these different definitions are, and understand what that means for you and any potential plans that you might have for an urban farm there. And then this is the link that'll just take you straight to the zoning map, but I did want to show you how to kind of figure out how to navigate the City of Chicago site, because sometimes it can be a little complicated unnecessarily. So as promised, I did want to talk about a little bit how can you go about changing zoning. There is a possibility for different adjustments that can take place in your zoning. I just want to make sure you all can see the presentation right now, since I'm flipping between screens. Okay, cool. So one thing that I mentioned before was that zoning opinion letter. So if you're looking at a site, you're not really sure, you've dug into a little bit of the history of it, getting a little bit of more of the context of it, but you want to make sure that you're kind of like in the clear before you move forward with anything or enter into a lease or purchase that land. It's a really good idea to get a zoning opinion letter. Of course, it's a city, so of course they're going to charge you. It costs $150. And right now, the zoning administrator that was in charge of that is a man named Patrick Murphy. This is some of his contact information. That's where you would send sort of like the, that PIN number that you're looking for, any of the other site details that you want to understand. That is the person that you would get in contact with if you want to get one of those zoning opinion letters to find out if you're in a safe zone or not. And it's, and it's obviously not guaranteed that, they're going to be like, yeah, great, go ahead. It's an opinion. You're paying them for their opinion. So, it's not going to give you any guarantees one way or another. Another way that you can address and change your zoning is through a variance. This is a little bit lengthy of a process. I do recommend having legal assistance through this process to be able to navigate that. From what I hear, it being a lot of people have seen that there's particular lawyers that you can work with that the Zoning Board of Appeals likes better. It's just part of the way that the system works, unfortunately, where it kind of like grease the wheels to get that moving along. Or, it might just be a long process too. The same thing for special uses. Special uses is one of the type of permit that you would need for if you want to do a rooftop operation in a business district, for example, and only in B3. All of that goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They're kind of the people who control, what gets designated what, if there's any changes that occur, if there's a new industry that wants to come in and they want that change, or there's an urban farm that wants to come in that wants that change, that's who you're going to have to deal with. And they're often referred to also as a ZOA, if you ever see that popping up. Another way to address your zoning and change your zoning is something that we saw previously with the Legend site, of getting either a map amendment or having it rezoned. Something like that does have to go through city council, so it's going to take a while. Like passing any ordinance or legislation in the city of Chicago, there's a lot of legwork that has to go into that, a lot of just preparation, talking with the proper council around that, and talking to the right alders, getting something like that pushed through, and a lengthy process. So we saw that those documents started in 2009, we're going through 2013, and then Legends is what it is now, but that took a while to get that way. And I can show you a little bit more once we get into a bit of the site history as well. So what are some other ways that you can get access to land to farm in Chicago? And this is something that I see happening more often than not with urban farm businesses in Chicago. It's because they've built good relationships. So that might be whether it's with a nonprofit that is a landholder, it might be with a religious institution that has a piece of land that they're interested in increasing food security for their parishioners or people in their immediate vicinity. It might be through a land use agreement with the park district. It might be through a direct relationship with your alder's office, and they have a piece of city-owned land that they're interested in seeing developed. Those are some of the other ways that you can find that piece of land that is going to work for you, and be able to cultivate on that land. I'm happy to talk with anybody about what are some of those ways to do that. If you have something in mind already, or if there's something that you're considering too, I'm here as a resource for you to provide technical assistance for figuring out how to navigate this overly complicated system. So please do feel free to reach out, and I'll make sure you all have my email too, if you want to explore what are some of those other ways. So we'll dig into a little bit of the site history that I keep referring to. Understanding what you're farming on is super important. We're working in a much larger biome and context, but like really honing in on what is the land that you're standing on, what's in the soil, what has been there before. Really understanding that is going to be useful for multiple reasons. Certainly for farm design. So, for example, you have a particular crop that needs a certain soil type that requires tilling, but there's a foundation of a building buried under there. You're going to want to know what was there before, right? Or say you want to put it in a hoop house, and you want to know how far down you're going to be able to put your posts and like be able to anchor your posts, right? Having an idea of what was there before. It's also going to be useful for, again, knowing about what potential hazards are there, what contamination. So, for example, if you're in an area, if you're on a piece of land that had a building on it before that was built before the 80s, right? It likely had lead paint on it. So you're going to want to know, it's like, oh, okay, these are the boundaries of where this building was. That means that these are the boundaries where there's a higher likelihood of there being lead contamination in the soil. So that when you go to test your soil, which I'm going to recommend over and over again, so you can just know what you're working in, when you go to test your soil, you'll know, oh, okay, in this area, there's a high likelihood of there being lead. So I know that when I go to that lab and I'm filling out what it is that I want them to test for, that I should be testing for lead in this particular spot. And just so you get a good idea of what those numbers, to know if it's harmful or not. I'll talk about it more later on, but one thing that in that lead piece in particular, the typical contaminants that people should be paying attention to in the city of Chicago are as far as heavy metals, are lead, cadmium, and arsenic. Those are three that are commonly found in soils in Chicago, and that could be potentially hazardous for your health and also accumulate in your body over time. Lead is one of those things that, I think it's often misunderstood, but when it's not just kids that you need to be worrying about. Like, even if you build raised beds and have an impermeable layer under the soil that you're growing in with your crops, even those surrounding areas, those pathways, if they're left uncovered, the lead is a contaminant because if it gets kicked up into the air and you inhale it, that's one of the primary ways that it gets into your body, aside from, through water as well. So, you think about who's going to be at the highest risk there. It's not necessarily your customers. It's the person who is most exposed to that, which is you, the farmer. You're the one who's constantly working in that soil. You're the one who has the exposure, not only working in the field, but then you have it on your clothes, you have it on your shoes, you bring that into your house. And now you have a source of contamination within your own home. So, it's just something to be really aware of. That I can't stress enough, to just be able to protect yourself. We're all about harm reduction at AUA, and this is one of the ways that you can just make sure that you're going to be safer over time as well. So having an idea of your site history, knowing what potentially on that site is just going to be to your benefit. Knowing your site history is also important just for the aspects of neighborhood historical memory. A lot of times, and in my own experience, I've found that, what I can't find through publicly available documents or even sometimes a FOIA request, people in your neighborhood and people who've been there a long time, who've lived there, who've seen the changes over time, are going to be able to be one of the greatest sources of information for really understanding what was happening on your site before. Sort of like whether it was like industry that was there, or if it's like a space that people have been, has been a gathering space for people for a long time. Like when thinking about your farm design and also just considerations, like those are things that you want to know. People also have relationships to pieces of land, right, in different spaces. So if people have really strong relationships to that land, that's something that you're going to want to know ahead of time, not only to ideally be able to accommodate for that in your site plan, but also know that to just be able to fortify your relationships with folks, so that, especially if you're going into a neighborhood that you're not from, to be able to just not seem like you're not snatching that land away from whatever community use it might have had before, or just the sort of way that it exists in people's historical memory, and, again, the relationships that they have to that space. But again, having those good relationships is going to help you out in multiple ways. One, it's going to mitigate those potential future complaints. Two, it's going to get people interested in your business and whatever, if you host events or, you have some kind of programming involved there, gather that interest. And then also just know what's happening on your site.
Also, the neighbors will also know what has happened in between people owning that property. An example that I know of is that between property, it seemed okay, but in between somebody was like parking a bunch of like cars there from their like auto shop and everything. So they were finding a lot of weird things in their soil. So, and that wasn't on public record or anything. So this is a great example of just like always trying to do as much detective work as you can. And Viviana brings up a really good point, is that the local community members know and see that like every single day. So they'll know if like, oh, that's a old car parking lot, or there was an urban farm there that nobody knew about, or something like that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, Paul, because like exactly that. I've seen exactly that happen on more than one occasion. Like, it's like, oh, it's a vacant lot. This is an empty piece of land. And one, land is never empty. There's always a history there, and there's also always a richness, particularly in the soil, no matter how deep you go. But also, yeah, like that sort of like, oh, people have been using it as a parking lot. Like, you're going to want to know that, because then you're also going to want to test, like, okay, was there an oil spill here? Was there like some kind of, leaky car sitting here for a long time? Not the best place to plant something, right? Or even if you're building a raised bed on top of that, just like having an idea of what was where is going to be beneficial. So again, those relationships are super key. I can't stress that enough. So helpful information for being able to understand what your site history is, that property identification number, that PIN number that you are able to find through the zoning map. Super key. It's going to come up over and over again. If you're looking at a piece of land, definitely find out what that PIN number is. Every single parcel of land, I would say across the US, has a PIN number, and something associated with it. So it's just going to help you. It's just kind of like whether it's your EIN for your business, or like it's basically like the phone number to be able to find you. Like that you need that number. It's going to come up over and over again. It's a social security number of that piece of land. It's probably a better comparison than a phone number. Yeah. So another tool that is free and available on the internet is Google Earth Pro. There's some helpful YouTube videos that'll give you even further of a deep dive of how to navigate these. I know Zach Grant over at Extension put one up, I think probably 2 years ago. It's on their YouTube channel of working with Google Earth Pro. Has your team, have you all talked about Google Earth Pro at all yet? Okay. This tool makes my nerdy heart sing. It is super helpful for not only understanding what was happening there before, but also site plans. It does take up a lot of space. So, it might be something that you download onto your computer and use for a little bit and maybe delete later and then bring back on. Or if you have enough space on your computer to do that, it can slow your machine down. So I'll just say it is kind of a clunky program. But you are able to find it on the internet, and I'm going to pull that up now. However, I have it already downloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and look up Google Earth Pro. Pops up right there. And while it's loading, okay, here we go. So I have just pulled it up. Can you see a globe?
Yes.
Great. So welcome to Google Earth Pro. It is a farmer's friend. It has data from the entire US. I haven't dug too much into other countries, but probably the world. It's all of the satellite images that have been taken since the late 90s. 1998 is typically as far back as it goes. So when finding out about your site history, it's super helpful. It doesn't tend to be that helpful for urban areas, but if you're looking at a rural spot or any place that outside of an urban area, there is an overlay that you can get that's specific to the soil web. It was produced by UC Davis in their soil labs, and it is able, that's this guy right here that you can see, and it'll give you soil data for loads of different places, just kind of give you an idea of what was there before, the composition of that soil, give you a good idea if a glacier's been there or not and whether it's dropped, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun to dig into. Unfortunately for the city of Chicago, it's mostly going to just say like urbanite. So it's not super helpful if you're trying to do anything in an urban area, but outside of that, lots of really useful data there to get a good idea of what the soil profile that you're working with. What's up, Paul?
How did you get that overlay? I never knew about that.
Yeah, it is covered in that YouTube video from U of I Extension with Zach Grant about Google Earth Pro. You can just download it. Yeah, right. I'm pretty sure you would go into the search bar and find it, but I'm not positive, and it's a rabbit hole. I don't think I have time to go down today. However, there is a supplemental YouTube video where you can find exactly how to navigate all that. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go with Legends again. So that official address is 4420 South Dearborn. Shows up a couple here, and we want to go to the one in Chicago. Hit search. And it is going to zoom us in. All the way back to this site that we were looking at before. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more just by double clicking, and that brings us back to Legends. So we just learned that these are all technically public alleys, that we had something else here before that a zoning change had to occur for, that it's currently a planned development here. And we can get a little bit more information now on what was there before. So there's a couple of different things that I'll highlight in here. Lots of different tools to work with here, but there's just a few that I'm going to cover today. One that I really like and that's going to be helpful for no matter what site you're working at. Oh, here's that urban land or yeah, so this is that sort of non-specific data that you'll typically get for an urban area. So if you go up to the toolbar along the top here, you'll see this little sun, right? And so right now it is 10:06 a.m. So it's showing us what it's going to look like at 10:06 a.m. here. But to get particularly for planning and getting a good idea of just like how your site looks like through the year, throughout the day, where you have really strong light exposure, where you might get some shade at some point, you can use this tool to see what it's going to look like at any time. So we're at 7:50 a.m. Okay, 6:09, we see the sun is just coming up. Like obviously, okay, 1:41 in the morning, it's dark, it is nighttime, and that's what it's going to look like then. This is what it looks like at dusk, and just kind of you see all these shadows moving around. You can get a better idea of like what it's going to look like at your site at a particular time of day. So you can get the full day for that and play around with that. I recommend it just to really understand, particularly for light, where it's following and what your sunlight exposure is going to be. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here to get back to the rest of the site. Okay, so another piece that is really helpful here, and that when I found it was like super exciting as far as site history. We can see that, and these are going to kind of vary in quality as far as the visual images that you're able to see. But right now, we're seeing the Google satellite image from June 2020. And then all this bar, you see that it goes from 2020 all the way to 1998. So we'll, go back a little bit. We'll see, okay, this is what it looked like in October of 2018. You see, it's the end of the growing season, lots of things growing up a little bit more. That's what folks were up to at that time at Legends. Go back a little further, we see in May of 2016, okay, this is what it was looking like. Clearly it's still early in the season. Things aren't growing as much. Go back a little bit further. All right, now we're into April of 2013. Remember, March of 2013 is when we were seeing those zoning changes happening. So none of those are built out right now. All we're seeing is the alleys that were there. We're seeing that they might have some drainage issues there, right? You see like all this little spot right here. It probably means there's a little bit of a lower area, or maybe there's even a sewer there. Paul, you probably know better than I about what specifically is happening there. Yep. So now you know that there's drainage there, right? That's where all the water is going to be draining to. That's inevitably going to be helpful when you're planning your site. But we see that the site is clear. There's no beds built up there yet. It's just this open land, and that's what was going on in April 2013. We go back a little bit further in June of 2010. We're like, all right, that's interesting. Clearly grass hadn't been planted there yet. We see that there's kind of these more shallow areas here. Lots of development still happening at the site. Some of the buildings that we see now weren't there yet. Probably some gravel there. So just thinking about your soil composition, just knowing what's under there. Go back a little bit further. We're in August of 2007. Like, all right, not too much information there. Looks like something was still going on the other side of the street. Those buildings were not there. Those homes are not on the other side of the street, still looking like it's under development, but there is grass on this particular site. Go back a little further, we're into November of 2004. Oh, wow, there's a whole building there, right? You see that there's a big open field across the street, and that there was a building that was at this site before. You see the footprint of that building. You see where it was. We see that, there's different things happening there. There's some open areas, but there's also probably a foundation of a building somewhere deep underneath there that you might want to consider, particularly if you're putting anything new on site. Go back a little bit further, that big old building is still there. We see an active parking lot across the street. We see that, there was a lot of different housing complexes here, and that there wasn't those kind of residential buildings across the street yet. and just kind of giving you an idea of like what was going on there before, what foot traffic may have been like, where cars were parking, where the building was, things to consider of like, all right, what might be coming off that building, when that building was demolished, like did asbestos come out? You know, just keeping all these things in mind of like all the different considerations. And just for fun, we'll keep going back in time just to see what was there. 2000, multiple buildings there. We see that there was a courtyard area in the middle there. Further back, 1999, you know, we get these kind of lower quality images, but still gives you an idea of what was going on. And this is, of course, going to vary from site to site. 1998, I guess, you know, somebody had a thumb over the camera or whatever, but can't see the whole site. But do know that, like, you know, these images are still available, and it's going to be across the globe. You're going to be able to kind of dig in to these kind of above ground images all the way back to 1998. And I assume that's when, you know, NASA, Google, government, you know, started recording all of these images. So another tool that's available here in Google Earth that is super interesting is this little piece here, which is a ruler. So if we click on that, it pops up, and it's going to give us some very helpful information. So it's like, all right, I want to know how much drip irrigation that I need. So I am working in, you know, I want to know how long my beds are, so I can, you know, multiply that by however many beds that I have, and then know how much drip irrigation I'm going to need. So if you look at the little pop-up here with ruler, you see line. You can choose the different units that you want it in. I'm going to stick to feet here, just for ease's sake. Be like, all right, I want my drip irrigation to go from this end all the way to this end. Oh, all right, good to know. That's 96 feet, right? That's the length of that particular area that you want to be thinking about. And this is just like me kind of like, you know, making a messy line, but you know, it's going to be super helpful for being able to understand what that is. Another piece that's really helpful here, beyond just like getting an idea of like spatially, you know, the length of things that you need to be considering, is also path is one of those things, because you can measure the distance between multiple points on the ground. So, you know, if there's a building there, we can go here and we want to see, okay, how tall is this here? We see that there is it's an increase of like 33 feet, right? And I'm not entirely sure about that, but I encourage you to play with it. You can also see the elevation profile there of that one line that I just drew of what that's gonna look like. So yeah, so we see, yeah, 595 feet. There's a 0% increase for whatever those dots that I was creating. But again, this one I'm not as experienced with, so I encourage you to play around with it. It's lots of fun. So if we go back, and you got to be careful with your mouse here because it will take you all over the place. So another piece of info that I find pretty helpful. Just get this overhead look again. Zoom in. Oh, nope, zooming me out. Ah. Excuse me as I navigate this wiggly tool. Okay. Okay, so say, you know, you figure out your incubator plot, and we go back to this ruler tool. You know, you figure out where it is that you're going to be growing, and you want to have a better idea of just how much space that you're working with. So go to the polygon tool, and we're going to be like, all right, so I'm going to be growing on this area right here, and you just click and click, and it's going to define that space. Right, and some of these you can also save it, so you can have it just as a map for yourself to be able to plan things too. And it's going to let us know that the perimeter of this particular area is 272 feet. So if you wanted to put up a fence for rabbits, you know that you need 272 feet of fencing to put there. If you want to know figuring out, calculating your cubic yards for compost order that you want to get. You see that the square footage of this particular area is 3,927 feet. And you can, again, change depending on the amount of land that you're working with, the units that you're working with, and really just getting a better sense of what the space is that you're working with without having to go out there with the measuring tape and doing the math. And this will do it for you. So it's a lot quicker. It's nice. And then one cool thing about this is you can also hit save, and it'll leave that line there so that you can come back in later and start, plopping different things in. You can also either take a screenshot or download this image and pull it into even a crop plan so that you can kind of be plugging things in particular places, or a site plan, be like, okay, in this area, I'm gonna put my outline, and that's where I want my my hoop house to be. Or I want to see what's the square footage of my hoop house. You just go over that, and you're able to figure out like what is the ground space that you have within that hoop house, and it'll tell you right there. So super helpful tool. I encourage you to play around with it. There's a lot more in there. It's a very rich tool. These are just a couple of things that are useful for us as farmers and figuring out how to plan sites, find a little bit more about it, and just have a better idea of what we're working with, and also be able to convey to other people what our ideas are too. Any questions on the Google Earth Pro tool? Okie doke. Okay, so I know we're running a little bit low on time here, but one more thing that I did want to touch on is getting a better understanding of who's the title holder on your land. This is something that is going to be important not only for negotiating a lease, but also potentially for getting water access, and all kinds of things of just like knowing where you stand as a business and whose land technically you're standing on, even if it was all stolen. Deeds are still important for the context of a business. So two sites that you can take your PIN number and you can go find out more information about that particular site is the Cook Recorder and also the Cook County Assessor's Office. So I'm going to go ahead and click on cookrecorder.com. And that is going to bring us to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office, who is currently Edward M. Moody. And you can go in there, excuse me, and what you're going to want to do is search public records. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And it gives us two different sites. They've got their old school site, which is still useful, still plenty of helpful information there. You may even be able to find the images of deeds a little bit more easily on that site, but you do need to get that PIN and type it in number by number. Their more updated site is this Onyx Power User site. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. The nice thing about this is it's a little bit more forgiving, whereas the other site, you have to have that PIN no matter what. You can use either the PIN or the address. I did save that PIN from before, so I went ahead and just dropped it in here. You can also use the address of whatever site you might be looking for. And let's go ahead and click on that. And we'll see that we found one PIN that is associated with that. There's often many other zeros that are associated with that particular piece, but it might not necessarily be relevant for these purposes. We'll see if we can find anything here. All right, we see that, and I was wondering if that site used to be Robert Taylor Homes or not. It's still possible that it was. You see here that it used to belong to the Chicago Housing Authority. In 2001, they had certificate of title. Going back further, we see 1992, still owned by the City of Chicago, Chicago Housing Authority, and 2009, Commonwealth Edison was up to doing something on there. There's also public records. So you can click on those. And in some cases, if you go over to this side, you'll see show doc. Sometimes you'll see a camera, which will indicate an image. In going through this site in preparation to kind of show you guys this, I found that more recently, a lot of the deeds that you previously could see images on this site have since been taken down and they're re-uploading them. So hopefully in the future those will be available, because it's, yeah, see, so image for doc number. And the thing about the Cook County Recorder of Deeds is that if you want to use it for anything, or if you need it for your own records or anything like that, you need to, in order to print it, you need to order it, and they do have a small charge for that. So let's see, always clicking on the things that are hyperlinked, you can usually find something, but in here, it doesn't look like there's a heck of a lot for that particular piece of land. We know that the title has since changed hands, and that zoning change did occur, but we're not able to put all the pieces together. In a lot of cases, it's going to be piecemeal, what you're able to find. But doing that search, doing that detective work, as Paul said, is going to be helpful again for just again, that context that you're working with, being able to gather as much information as possible. Of what are some ways that you can look into this. I'm going to use Farm on Ogden as an example, so you can see, just some of the things that are available there. So it's 3555 Ogden. Go in there. Okay, we see. Oh, okay. There's a couple of things here. We can see. I was like, oh, great, title show. Can we see who's on the title? Maybe. Documents recorded on this parcel. Okay, we see. Oh, there's a bunch of information here. So as late as 2018, it's like, okay. We see that Lawndale Christian Health Center, acquired the land in 1999. And it was quick claim to them. Previous mortgage was held either by Sherwin-Williams and the Bigelow Company. We see that as they were developing the site, liens were placed on it from the different construction companies that were involved there. We see that again here, and that happened through they were released from that lien in 2018. So now we see Farm on Ogden the way it is now, still owned by Lawndale Christian Health Center. It has all these new developments on it, but this is a little bit more of like who that title has passed hands, and there's not many other places that you can find that sort of specific information, unless you're asking directly the people who had a hand in changing it. So you can get information about the property taxes, and it'll let you know a little bit more about like what the value, what it has been appraised at in the past, and for the taxes. It'll give you, let's see, do we get any pictures here? No, it says it should, but it looks like it's broken. So a lot of this information, unfortunately, from this site is missing as of late, but it is still a place where you can get lots of information. Yes. So again, just a helpful site to just get a little bit of a more understanding of if there's a piece of land that you're looking at. See if it's currently held by somebody. Even if they don't list any kind of contact information, you at least know who was there before, and kind of be able to kind of start teasing out, okay, like who is it that I talked to? Who is it that I need to have this conversation with to let them know that I'm interested in having an urban farm on this piece of land. Getting a better understanding of like what was there before. Again, it's going to be helpful for that site history piece, and just gathering as much information as you can about a site. Another site that you can find out more information in is the Cook County Assessor's Office. And this is going to be particularly helpful just for knowing the appraised value of the site. So if you are looking to purchase that piece of land, that will let you know, how much it's gone for in the past, what are the taxes that you're dealing with. So one that just might be fun to deal with is, I'm going to go ahead and look up the Sears Tower to see, what that's appraised at. And I didn't enter the PIN. So I can also search by address. And if I go here, enter that what is it? 233 South Wacker Drive in Chicago. And it brings us to the Cook County Viewer. Yeah, if I went back and I found that pin, it would give me more specific information. It'll tell you how much it's worth, who currently owns the Sears Tower, and how the kind of property value has changed over the years. So this is a tool that's probably really helpful to developers as well as they're figuring out like, oh, okay, what do I want to do? What do I want to develop in a particular place? If you're looking to purchase land, this is going to be a super helpful site to just get an understanding of what the value of that land has been in the past and what you can expect to pay for it now. But I realize we're getting real close on time here, so I'm just going to stop right there and open it up for questions. Don't all jump at once.
That Google Pro software, that's a free download, or you bought that?
Nope, it's free. It's free. If you go into Google, type in Google Earth Pro, you should be able to download it for free. Everything I'm showing you is available for free. And it's all public record.
Thank you so much. This was great information.
Glad it could be helpful.
And in the city of Chicago, what are you finding the availability of land for urban farms?
Yeah, it is. It's frustratingly difficult to find land for urban farms in the city of Chicago. It is something that I end up focusing a lot of my work on because so many people are dealing with the difficulties. So it always, like, to what I have seen be successful is where people are always coming back to their relationships. So, really thinking about through your business, who you're trying to serve. And yes, it's a business, but inevitably, it's food, and that food has to go somewhere, and that food is working to mitigate the effects of food insecurity. So who are you trying to serve? So looking at the different organizations that are involved with that, looking at different, landholders. NeighborSpace is a big landholder in Chicago too. That does have some urban farms, even though in theory they primarily focus on community gardens, but that is one avenue. The Park District is another place that you can explore as well. Those residential, it always, and I would, it'd probably take a whole other presentation to really dig into it, but it's really always going to come down to what it is that you're doing at the site, how you're incorporated. So if you're a nonprofit and you're donating all your food, or you're working with, a particular program to make sure that your produce goes to that specific area, there's other possibilities for you in which land that you're able to access versus if you're a straight up for-profit urban farm business. Being able to sell that produce is going to change what land is technically available to you. So really, it's just, there's a lot of considerations there. And as you're identifying where you want to work, how you want to incorporate, what your revenue streams are going to be, to be able to kind of thread that needle of what's the best plan for you. So, and this goes for you, Deshawn, and anybody on this call. I'm happy to talk through some of these nuances with you. I'm happy to come back and talk more about some of these other pieces that we didn't get a chance to cover today. But yeah, land access is forever going to be an issue, always coupled with water access, and those are pretty intertwined too. I'm seeing more and more. So there's definitely some possibilities there, but it's always going to come back to who you've built a relationship with, how you're able to collaborate with other partners, how, being able to figure out what your markets are, what are your revenue streams. That's what's really going to help define your land access inevitably. Yeah.
Okay, and just to follow up, is there, to your knowledge, is there any grants or any initiatives to push for special designations for areas that are designated food deserts or anything like that, that the city happens to be involved in?
Yeah, so there was so grant. I'll get to the grant piece and first talk about the initiatives. So there was a law that was passed. I'm not sure. I think it was 2 years ago at this point. At the state level, Representative Sonia Harper was helped to pass the urban ag areas bill, right? So this allows particular privileges for urban agriculture projects, with reduced rates on utilities, which includes water, different tax considerations and tax programs for landholders that will kind of lower the barriers for being able to grow on particular pieces of land. This is something that I know that the city is interested in. However, Chicago is a home rule city, meaning that any law or bill passed at the state level, we don't necessarily have to adopt. So while it exists at a state level, Chicago has not yet adopted the urban ag areas bill. So meaning that we don't have particular areas that are designated as urban ag areas. I would say that the closest thing to that is probably the Englewood Village farms that have been being developed over the last couple of years. That's probably a likely area that if we did have that urban ag areas, that would be a space that would be designated as such. But that also further limits where urban farms are allowed. It has to be within that specific urban ag area. So there's some nuances there, but there are definitely possibilities there as well. And then as far as financial programs and grant programs, there are a number of different foundations and initiatives that exist that are working in the Chicagoland area that seek to promote specifically our own food sovereignty and our food system here. Some of those being like there's a grant that's available right now through Fresh Taste that's like I think it's like the Chicago Regional Food System Grant, and it's specifically in response to COVID. But that is one potential foundation that does make funding available. AUA also has put ourselves in the position to be able to be a regranting organization to be able to receive funds and pass those on to businesses that might be incorporated as for-profit and not necessarily nonprofits that typically aren't eligible, nonprofits are eligible for those grants, but for-profits are not. So through organizations like ours and others, we're able to make those funds available to folks because there are a whole lot of financial barriers for urban farm businesses. Banks are still really catching up on the loan piece because like we're pretty unique in our business structure for being able to repay those loans. So, that's one of the avenues that we've kind of found to make funds available. There's also national programs like the National Young Farmers Coalition does make funds available. And also there's a brand new Office of Urban Agriculture at the USDA. So while I'm not quite sure what that means for us yet, but that is another avenue that's opening up that the federal government is recognizing that like, okay, urban agriculture is not going away. It's something that needs to be supported and it needs to be funded. So our funds that in the future will be coming down that pipeline as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
No problem. So there's a whole lot more that I can talk about and get through today, but we'll probably just have to revisit that at another time. Again, I'm happy to make this information available to each of you. I'll share this presentation with Paul as well. So if you want to go ahead and kind of bop through that and check out the links, I encourage you to do that and do your own research. And of course, you can always get in contact with me. I will put my email address in the chat right now. And you can feel free to hit me up with questions whenever they come up.
I want to say thank you from the class. This was a very, very helpful wealth of knowledge because the city, and I think sometimes they just do things on purpose to try to frustrate and aggravate people from going forth with their plans. So I want to thank you for being a wealth of information and resource that we can go to.
Absolutely, I'm helpful. I'm happy to be helpful and to be of service to you all because I, for all the reasons that I got involved with it and many more, being able to execute our own food sovereignty is super important, and being able to have the tools to be able to figure out how to navigate this when it's overly complicated and probably intentionally so. I'm happy to help us figure it out. I've dealt with my own frustrations. I hear other people's frustrations all the time. There are a lot of things that don't need to be this way, but that's why Advocates for Urban Agriculture exists, to help people navigate this and figure out ways that we can, really carve our space out to be able to continue to produce food for ourselves, for our communities, and just, bolster our local food economy, because we need it. I plan on surviving, so.
So thank you. Two things I was hoping you could talk about is one, and this is a really long answer, I guess, but if you had to give somebody that is looking to start their own urban farm within the city limits, what kind of timeline would you advise them to have, and what are the first, I guess, 3 steps they should be doing, even if they don't have a parcel of land identified? And then afterwards, I was hoping you could talk about if they're you are a grower, but you are an urban agriculturalist that is more on the advocacy side. And if people are interested in going into more the advocacy side of things, within agriculture, urban agriculture, how can they do that? And also, just if they want to get involved in AUA, what are some other initiatives or ways or things we should look out for?
For sure. Thank you for that, Paul. So if you are just starting out, I think the first thing to get a better sense of is, understand where you want to work. What are the markets that you're trying to reach? Who are the people that you're trying to work with? Is there a particular neighborhood that you want to be in? That's just kind of identifying for yourself where it is that you want to work. So whether it's in your neighborhood, or if it's in other people in a neighborhood that you're not from, all those are just kind of that's where you start, right? Start with yourself. So what do you want to do? After that, I would say, once you have identified an area, get to know who's there. Get to know what kind of organizations are working there, what sort of community initiatives exist. What's the landscape already? Are there other farms there? Are there community gardens? Is there a farmer's market in that neighborhood? Get to know how familiar people are with urban agriculture already, and get a better, just again, that context piece. After that, I think, and also within that, checking out, see if there's a quality of life plan. See if who are the active organizations, the type of work that they do, who are the kind of the loud voices in that neighborhood or in that particular area, getting familiar with them, introducing yourself, building those personal relationships with folks. And then of course, getting to know your alder's office as well, assuming you're working in the city of Chicago. Get to know what ward are you in? What are the priorities of that alder? Are they somebody who is really about community projects like this, or do they hate urban agriculture? Because there are alders out there who legit have a disdain for urban agriculture, and it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. And so you're going to need to figure out how to navigate that. And AUA can support in that too. One of the ways that you can get involved is through our ward ambassador program. I'll talk more about that in a second. But just figuring out, how to kind of smooth those relationships and make sure that you're coming in a way that isn't jarring, that you're not coming in with all these assumptions, that you're not coming in. And what I see happening a lot of times is a sort of urban ag colonialism that ends up happening, of okay, there's a lot of land that's available on the south and west side. Let me just, come from a neighborhood that I'm not from, plop in and be okay, I'm going to tell you what's good for you. No, that's not ever how people should be operating, right? So really just getting a good sense of of what's already happening, and what people's relationship to that land is as much as possible, that sort of thing, right? And then, digging into some of these tools that I just showed you of getting a better idea of what that site history is, who's there, just kind of getting all the the documented proof of what's happening there, and then also that sort of conversational idea of what's happening there is super key too. Also, something that's inevitably going to be helpful if you do it, when you're looking at sites, is check out where your hydrants are at, because that's going to be a lot more affordable to get access to your water versus installing your own water on site. You can also, there's other methods for that I could do a whole nother presentation for that, but that's one of those pieces that you want to do keep in mind as well. Is not only, what's your soil looking like, what does the land look like and what was there, but also what's your water access like too. And again, I'm happy to support through this whole process from, just kind of questioning to kind of more idea building and more site planning. I'm here for all that. So please do reach out. It's my job. I'm happy to help you. And then as far as a little bit more about what AUA does, definitely a lot of advocacy there that's going on. Right now, we're really hyper-focused on the water access issue and making sure that urban farms do have access, and community gardens, because there are new policies that were just imposed by the Department of Water Management that we're still trying to figure out how to navigate, and are more complicated than they have been in the past, and there's new cost considerations as well. But generally, we have a couple of different ways that we do advocacy, both creating policy, advocating policies that others have introduced. We do that through a couple of ways. I welcome all of you to get involved in our associate board, where we have professionals from lots of different types of fields who are all interested in promoting urban agriculture, come together and really talk about what's going on, some of these policy issues. We have an advocacy committee on our associate board where you can really dig in and figure out ways that we can promote urban agriculture at a city level for the most people, not just for ourselves individually as farms, but really looking out for our other farmers out here too, trying to figure out how to navigate all this. We also have something called the Ward Ambassador Program that I mentioned before, where AUA trains and coordinates ward ambassadors across the city. We're working to get to all of those 50 wards. I think we're somewhere in the 30s right now as far as our representation, but do want to have somebody in every single ward who can, as a ward ambassador, can act as a liaison between the alder's office, kind of presenting themselves, letting them know, like, if you have any questions about urban agriculture, or if you have any complaints that come in, like, I can be a resource for you and kind of fill you in on just kind of, because like I've noticed over the years that alders and most people who aren't involved in this field already have no frame of reference for urban agriculture or really understand what it is. So ward ambassadors serve as a sort of liaison to kind of fill in the gaps for them, get them a little bit more familiar, and be that liaison not only for their own interests, but also between the alder's office and then any other urban agriculture projects that might exist in a ward, like community gardens, like other urban farms, like initiatives that are starting up, or some of the mutual aid projects that are happening in agriculture. Like, all of that is going to be of interest to the alder's office because they want to know what's going on the land that they have dominion over. And so, again, like, if, there is a complaint that comes into the alder's office, it's better to have somebody who's familiar with urban agriculture that can kind of explain things before they go and send streets and sanitation out there and give them a citation that's $500 a day. So that's one of the ways that we get involved, to just kind of provide information, education to alders' offices so that they have a better frame of reference for what urban agriculture means for our neighborhoods, means for our food access, and means for just the city overall in our food security, which has become particularly evident during this pandemic, and it's more on people's minds more than ever, I would argue, or maybe not ever, because there's a lot of precedents set in the city of Chicago. Victory Gardens were huge back in the day. There's a lot of agricultural history in the city of Chicago of not only those home gardeners, but also the stockyards, all that. That's why we can still keep livestock in the city, because of that legacy. But, as of late, it's a little bit further from the minds of most alders. So our organization exists to kind of fill in those gaps, kind of help educate, and, build relationships and really build a critical mass of people who want to see our food system thrive in the city and support our local economy and all of the, the effects that can have on our neighborhoods and our lives. Yeah, so those are two of the main ways that you can get involved with AUA just as a farmer. We host lots of events throughout the years. We have Food Sovereignty Action Days where we gather folks and we'll bring them typically to a community garden to kind of get those big tasks done. So if you're involved in a community garden right now and you have a mountain of mulch that needs to get moved or a ton of compost order that you just got in, the Food Sovereignty Action Days exist as where we gather a group of people to just knock big tasks out. So that we can kind of like open up that pathway towards the execution of food sovereignty and kind of collectively support you in getting, being able to achieve that and work towards that. We have lots of other workshops throughout the years. The Good Practices for Growing in Chicago program is also a workshop series. So you'll see if you get involved either on our listserv or get, sign up for our newsletter. Again, check out our website, the auachicago.org. Lots of resources on there, whether you have particular questions about the compost ordinance or we have a super rich document on there called our resource guide. So as soon as you go to that website, you'll have the chance to download it if you haven't seen it already. And that has it's a kind of like a step-by-step guide of how you start a farm business in Chicago. So I definitely recommend checking that out. It's all peer-reviewed by people who are active practitioners in the field. So we updated it last year. So it's a lot of fresh information, a lot of relevant information, and a lot of experience that people are speaking from. So definitely recommend checking that out. Gathering some information from there. We also have a directory for just like getting resources on there, whether it's particular professionals that you might be looking to work with, whether it's, you want to write a lease and you need to talk with somebody about writing that lease, or, talk with SCORE professionals that I would also recommend talking with to kind of help you build up your business. Or, where are the local sources for compost? Where are the local sources for, cedar or, whatever it might be. That's a really good place to just it's just a big old catalog of all the different places that you can find information that has been populated by people who have already been seeking out those resources as well. We typically also have we have a fall gathering where it's just a gathering of farmers from around the city to talk about, what's been happening throughout the year, what are some of our successes from the season, where are we at with different policy issues, just a place to kind of share space on a more just kind of to like vibe with each other and have more of a community of practice there as well. We also have a farmer-to-farmer mentorship program where you can be paired with a farmer who's already experienced, who's gone through some of these trials and tribulations, and you can talk with them one-on-one to really kind of, get into the nitty-gritty of what that means. It's also, we encourage people to be both mentors and mentees because we believe that you always have something to both teach and learn. So, you might have a particular area of expertise that somebody else might be really benefit from. Like if you're incredible at building out aquaponic systems, like somebody wants to know that out there. So you can, and mentors are also compensated for that time because we think it's really important recognizing that how hard it is to be financially sustainable as a farm business in the city of Chicago. We like to figure out ways that we can also supplement that income by honoring your expertise and really, encouraging you to keep going, even if it's just like in a small way through, being financially supportive as well as an organization. So those are some of the main programs that we have going on right now. Moving forward, we are, for the more established businesses, we have a capacity building grant, part of that re-granting that I mentioned before. That is just a funding opportunity to for-profit businesses who would otherwise have difficulty accessing capital to build up their operations, kind of some of those infrastructure pieces. Like you say you want to build a wash pack station and you don't have the money for it, that's one avenue that you can get that funded. But lots of opportunities there. So those are some of our main pieces of programming. I'm always available if you get involved with our newsletter, get tapped into our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram. We do a little bit of Twitter, but we're more active on Facebook and Instagram. I encourage you to follow us at AUA Chicago. And there you'll see announcements for our different events, for our different webinars, for just some of the grants that are available. And on that tip, on our website, auachicago.org, we also have a grants and funding page where you can see kind of like a running list of grants that are available for urban agriculture and agriculture projects in general. We also have a jobs page. So if you're looking for work in the urban agriculture field, that's another place where we have regular postings from different pre-existing businesses where, I'm definitely going to encourage you to just kind of check them out and be able to benefit from their experience as well. Yeah, and then we also have a calendar. So if you're hosting your own events and you want to be able to publicize that, you can add your own events to our calendar and also see events of other, workshops and fundraisers and whatever it might be hosted onto that site. So definitely a wealth of information and different resources that you can access there. And again, I'm always here to help you figure out how to navigate that as well.
Thank you, Viv. Are there any last questions for Anna?
I have a question if nobody else does.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm looking in the chat and I see that Zachary had said that sounds like you liked the presentation, which I'm happy about. And you also mentioned that it's eye-opening. I'm curious what in particular was eye-opening for you?
Well, just how much information is pretty much readily available publicly if you kind of go through the channels that are provided by the city. Generally, the word or just the whole concept of zoning is pretty intimidating, and also isn't something that you really are ever going to encounter unless you get to the level of like starting a business or even beyond starting a business. It's more foundational to a degree where you're like, I don't even know where to begin with that. Like, where do I, it's just something that there's a lot of barriers in between. So that, and then the Google Pro program, like how much information is in there and how much you can alter the layers or overlay with information. So that was just what I meant by that.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the context I'm working in and what's helpful for folks too.
No, yeah, definitely the whole like walkthrough with the Google Earth Pro and like the walkthroughs are definitely super helpful and kind of make everything more real and less political, I guess you'd say. It makes it just more like task oriented, like this is where you can find the information, as opposed to like you need to, the relationships are important, but informing yourself is, I would say, more important when you're kind of getting something off the ground.
For sure. Yeah, being as informed as possible is always going to be helpful. And all this stuff is publicly available, but people typically just don't know it's there. So I'm happy to highlight this for folks and show how we can use it for promoting urban agriculture too.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Viviana. This stuff is always amazing to know, and Zach brings up really good points, like really having like a map of how to do this kind of stuff really helps. And this is the kind of material that a lot of people who study urban agriculture, like all of us are studying like soil and like how to grow, like all this different kind of stuff. But this is the kind of material you will run into once you start going your own farm business, you start operating some of these other farm businesses themselves. A lot of this stuff that, like I always say, like a farmer has to be well-versed in a lot of different things. This is kind of an example of why we have to be well-versed. We have to be not only like plant biologists, but we have to know about zoning, we have to know about all this kind of stuff. And even in the city of Chicago and the outside of the city of Chicago, like if you want to run a farm business or you want to help someone run a farm business or go into like the kind of not-for-profit world, all of this you kind of have to take into consideration. And none of this is learned overnight. This is something that I think all of us are just kind of like in the process of learning. and it's something like skills you just developed like over your career. But the sooner you get introduced to this kind of material, the more you know it's out there, and the more you know you look out for it. So again, I just encourage you to like reach out to people like Viviana. There's other organizations too in Chicago that do this like similar work too. And yeah, and just try to take a lot of this stuff into your own hands, because there's a lot of work to do in Chicago. So on that note, thank you, Viviana. I will end class for today. I'll stop recording in 1 second. If anybody wants to speak or like chat for a while, I will have this like chat room open. I'd love to see how everyone's doing. If not, have a great day. And again, thank you, Viviana.
Thanks for
Have a good one,
inviting me.
everyone.
Thank you.